Hey everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode number 88.
88.
Yes. Oh, nice and slow. It's our palindrome number. This is our 8th palindrome number. We only have one more palindrome number until 100. So, and then we'll have 101, which is another palindrome.
But then how about 1001?
Yeah, it gets pretty far out there, but that's going to be a long time. Anyway, we're glad you're joining with us. If you're new to this podcast, this is not about shapes or numbers. This is actually about chasing truth wherever it leads and wherever it runs. And we're just excited to have you with us. This is brought to you by Olive Branch Community Church, and I'm Greg Harris. I'm actually the senior pastor there at Olive Branch, and my co-hosts are co-compatriots, whatever you want, rabbit chasers. We can use lots of names.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach coordinator here, and thank you so much for those of you who are following us on YouTube now, so you can see our lovely faces on the recording. But let us know that you're watching. If you're watching, especially on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the church website.
Ring that bell, whatever.
Yeah, if you want to ring the bell,
Ding,
if you want
ding, ding.
But even more importantly, if you would share it with your friends and your loved ones, it's much easier to share with the social media. But also, if you're still watching us on Apple iTunes, or if you're watching us on Spotify,
Or listening to us.
Yeah. If you're watching, you're just staring at your computer blankly.
And I'm kind of old.
You can picture what we look like now, though.
If you are watching it on YouTube, feel free to share it on your MySpace account. Feel free to share it on your
You can share it with your
account.
friends.
Talk
your
about it on your
AOL
live journal.
through your AOL email account.
Oh, make sure your Prodigy Online is doing really well.
There you go. Boom chakalaka. So
Your dial up.
yeah. So don't forget, hit subscribe. And also, if you don't know, you just subscribe to the Olive Branch Church and School website on YouTube. So,
Well, if
so
they've
that's
got
where you'll
questions
find
for us.
everything there.
They got questions for us, Brent. You've been missing this last few weeks. Where do they ask questions?
Oh,
I have a
that's
question.
what I was missing. I knew I was missing something.
No, not
you
just
know
your
what?
hair.
One of the things, if you guys have any comments, if you have any questions, we would love to engage with you. And you could do that by emailing us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. rabbittrail@obcc.church. So we get them and we answer them and we even respond to them. So we would love to hear your comments, your feedback, and your questions. So my name is Brent. I'm the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch Church. And again, we love engaging with you. So let us know that you're listening. Give us your information so we can put you on the email list. We will not spam you. I can guarantee you that. But we can keep you updated on any events coming up or anything interesting. So
Yeah, cool.
yeah, if we do anything interesting.
Sometimes we're interesting. Sometimes that's very debatable. But we're glad that you guys are indeed with us. And as we're diving in here at our church, we are working through a series that we're calling the Jesus Spiral. And we've been talking about discipleship and all kinds of misnomers about discipleship, from it being like a checklist and it being kind of something people just consume and move on. And so we've been working on this idea of kind of what it really means to follow Jesus and what it really begins to look like when we're engaging and abiding and loving him. And then this week we talked about really living for Christ and kind of the idea being summarized by Jesus in the book of Luke, where he's like, listen, when you got a teacher, nobody's above their teacher. Like, you've got to be able, you're going to become fully trained like your teacher if you're going to follow him, kind of thing. And, that's what we want. We want to be like Christ. We want to be like our teacher. So we're following him. Not going to be easy. There's going to be things to change. And this week we're on foundational, where we're talking about like the key piece in all of this is you got to obey. And so that just opens a host of interesting different questions. We've talked about a few of them before, like how do faith and works work together and different stuff like that. But, we kind of came up with a few different thoughts. And Brent, why don't you take us into kind of the first run down which rabbit trail? Which one did you want to dive down?
Well, the sermon topic was foundational, right?
Yeah,
and it was
about
talking
obedience.
about teaching, and who are you following was the question you asked.
No,
right?
I'm talking about obedience. First week was who are we following? This one's about obedience.
Foundational. So
You're gonna follow Jesus to be like him. Then you're gonna move into.
So maybe you were doing a summary, because that was at the top of my notes.
That's my summary. That was my.
So
you listened to the intro.
I
I'm
do.
very proud of you.
I always
very
listen
often
to
you
your
don't listen to
intros.
anything.
But you were talking about, again, you just, to reiterate what you said, was the disciple is not above his teacher, but when he's fully trained, he will be like him, you know, and so kind of that mentor teacher thing. And one of the things that I thought is, you know, we look at our lives as we're growing up, right? There are people that have influenced our lives. There are teachers that we've had in our life that had an impact. There's also been poor teachers in our life. And I think, you know, there's situations that are occurring daily where you kind of have to go, okay, don't listen to that teacher on that specific subject. So again, teachers are important, and we should, and really when we listen and take in, we develop to be more aligned with them, right?
We can't. So the ancient world, just for clarity, like if you're a teacher, we really appreciate the work that you do.
You're a good teacher.
If you're a Christian, if you're a good, if you're a Christian and you're a teacher, you're in a tough spot because there's a lot of pressures on teaching things sometimes you don't even want to teach, and feeling like you have to do that. I'm just going to advise you don't anyway. But that's a whole other conversation we could get into. But in the ancient world, teaching was, you had a choice. Like, you chose your teacher. Like, Jesus is a weird, like, I don't mean that weird like bad, but like he's out of the norm of the ancient world, where he told people, come follow me. Like, you didn't normally get, like, the rabbi walking up to you telling you, I want you in my group. You fisherman, you with your dirty, salty language, like, come follow me, right?
Matey.
Yeah, it's like pirates days. No, Jesus was different. He was picking out just kind of what appears in some cases random, but he knows what he's doing. And it's just so different because they're following him. But you would go find the teacher you wanted to be like, and then you would go put yourself under their tutelage. And you would, tutelage, I love that word, and you would learn from that person fully and completely everything they had to teach you. And so that's not like our modern day, right? I mean,
No.
how's our modern day work, Steve?
You get assigned a teacher and you have to go, because if you don't, you get in trouble.
Right.
I mean, that's your current model, or you don't get the degree. There's certain teachers you have to take because they're the only one available for your course or whatever. So
and they
you
could be
always get to
horrible.
pick
Like,
them.
I mean, unfortunately, my son is in one of these kinds of courses right now where he's having to be taught in his English comp course. This person is using what we would call a queer theory hermeneutic. And people don't know that this stuff exists, and so they don't know how to push back on it. But basically, it's like, it's the stuff that says, like, Abraham Lincoln was gay, because they're reading sexuality into the text that doesn't exist at the time period, because the mores were different and the social life was different. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff that he's just reading fairy tales, and she's giving him this way of having to read it, and it's uncomfortable for him, but he has to take this class. Now, if he could choose a good teacher and choose a different class, man, we would do that. And it's just the difficulty of in some of our teaching education. Like, a lot of you teachers, you're told what to teach. You know, you're using a curriculum you didn't get to design that doesn't uphold your values or your worldview. And trust me, I'm going to get on a little my own rabbit trail.
And it's mandated by law.
Right. And people don't realize this. I'm going to say this for fun because this is like one of my favorite observations I've ever made. And again, I grew up in public school, went to public school. My dad taught. My mom was involved. She was deep into. I have my in-laws. My mother-in-law was in.
Your family's a bunch of teachers.
We're a bunch of teachers, you know. We just like teaching. My sister teaches. So, but what blows me away is you can really see the worldview if you will just zoom out from the detailed curriculum for a second and just kind of look at what's being given to your kids and giving to you. And sometimes we don't even realize what we're given. I'll give you a simple example. They divided our world history up and stopped at the French Revolution. So you do American Revolution and stuff, and American history starts that off, but then you stop at the French Revolution. And I'm like, why is the French Revolution so key and central in the conversations of our world history? Except that it is the birthplace of what we would call a liberal political ideology in Europe and the United States. And so it's critical to that. And like, you'll spend a long time on the French Revolution and those thinking patterns.
Yeah, the libertine thoughts.
Yeah. You'll get into language arts. And I find it fascinating, like, you don't read all the different literature, but like, I think of the Scarlet Letter, right? You have to read the Scarlet Letter. You don't read any Puritans. The only Puritan you're actually going to read is a guy named Jonathan Edwards. And what's the book? What's the
In the hands of an angry God.
Sinners in the hands of an angry God. This man wrote tomes of literature, tons of sermons.
Lots of sermons.
And we pick the one out that makes him sound like some fire-breathing crazy Puritan. We take Nathaniel Hawthorne's book about Puritans that he wrote 100 years after the Puritans were around, and he hated the Christian church. And we tell kids, read this and you'll learn about the Puritans. What? And then we take Mark Twain, who was a bit of a, a humorist. He was a satirist, but he hated the church.
Yeah, especially in his later life.
And
he was really
you end up
pretty cynical.
Or, for example, you read Moby Dick, or even
Moby Dick is a kind of a polemic against, I guess, chasing the white whale is like a god figure for him.
Right, he was very against the church. And then you start looking in the 60s. Who said these were classic books? Like some of these other writings. Well, they're classic to a certain particular thinking pattern. And so then you look at, here's another simple one that bugs me in education stuff that we're struggling with. Why is it you have to take government and econ at the same time? Because it's a liberal thinking pattern that thinks the government and economics go together. They don't go together. You should be teaching business far apart from politics, because they're not even the same sphere of philosophy. And so you can if you just step back a little bit, you start to go like, wait, we're America. Why are we not teaching actually how to run a business and how to do, and some people go, whoa, some classes you do. Yeah. But it's very strange that we've moved into a certain direction away from reading, writing, and arithmetic, which was the trivium, which was a concept coming from Europe that supported some of the greatest thinkers in the world and produced some of the greatest scientific revolutions in the world, to kind of this interesting kind of mishmash of thinking. So anyway, and I could get into where that all comes from and all that's fun stuff, but this is what teachers have to deal with, and they don't even get a chance to always realize it. Sorry, go ahead, Stu.
A lot of our culture has already dictated in many ways that we don't always have the freedom to examine a worldview that we may not even be aware of. Like in psychology, Kenzie and a lot of the Foucaultian thought on sexuality permeates almost all of the theories now, when before it was actually a kind of a conversation and debate. So it's just like you don't realize that a lot of worldview assumptions that aren't necessarily based on science or based on anything, it's just this is where our culture is right now and this is what we're saying is important, make their way into the education system. So knowing kind of, well, what's the worldview, doing some history, even if there's some really good books out there too, just Carl Trueman's books and stuff like that are pretty good on just kind of looking where the history of things comes from and how we're being taught, because you'll find that this could be a simple question for someone and they could actually put a little pebble in their shoe to get them to think, hey, why do we do that? And there is some thought about it. So
I think the idea is to get back to a little bit of like, not to make a teacher's job more difficult. I mean, it's a different thing when you're when you're doing elementary school and stuff like that. By the time you're in junior high and high school, critical thinking skills are necessary, and a teacher would expect in the ancient world to be pushed back on in a critical thinking manner, or you were just being trained. Now Jesus is different. Jesus is this one who is teaching them not just a philosophy of life. He's teaching them about God. He's unifying an entire worldview that will actually birth our world. And that's how good of a teacher he was. And I do think he was a genius on the par of like none other. Like you just don't have someone who has impacted all the spheres, as we'll find out this weekend, every sphere of reality as deeply as Jesus really has. So,
and I do think, like you were saying, there's kind of a delineation between Jesus as a teacher and sitting in class, having 5 different classes and 5 different teachers in one day as the model for a teacher, because I do think that there's an influence aspect in that shaping as well. And just getting some knowledge and not having any personal relationship with them necessarily doesn't have the influence, right? You're just basically transferring knowledge. Where Jesus, he not only taught, he lived it out before them, and basically told them, go and teach others to do as I have done and as I have taught you and commanded you.
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And so I do think that, part of that that influence is really being entwined and, relationally as well. Because that influence, and I will also say, a lot of basically everything to some degree influences you, and I do think that you have to be a little critical or at least aware of of how you're being influenced.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, like you were talking about worldview, but movies. Okay, well, I'll watch these kinds of movies. I won't watch these kinds because I know how they make me. But these kinds of movies, I'm okay with these because they don't really affect me. No, everything you take in affects you.
Yeah, and that's perfect, because I think what Jesus was teaching the disciples was how to take not critically, like we think of critical thinking but he was teaching them
negative,
right? We think of it as negative. It's not. He was teaching them to take it in process it from a particular worldview in light of what he's teaching. And so that goes like to one of the comments that we'll talk about later, in about like taking in what you're watching. Mm-hmm. And it's a great question to ask yourself: are you being taught by this? And in what ways are you being taught by? Art teaches, like television teaches. Like there's a lot of beliefs out there.
Are you influencing? Are you endorsing? That type of thing too.
But yeah, even like for us, for example, we like to watch. Sometimes we don't watch sexual content stuff with our kids, but we've watched movies that are probably above their pay grade, above their age zone. In the sense of like language, or even maybe in some cases some war or violence movies. And the reason we do it is because we are like, look, you need to understand. We need to have a conversation about this kind of thing. So let's watch John Adams, or let's watch a movie on the brothers, the Band of Brothers. And we've done that more with our older two at first, but now it's moving to the next level with our kids. But it's always with a conversation, because we don't want to present the media as the movie as the teacher. The show is the teacher. We're the teacher, in the sense of we're wanting to help you know how to navigate and think through good questions from a Christian worldview on these various things. And so I do think that, like, I was just curious, how do you guys go around being careful, and what with your teachers, with these kinds of people that you may sidle up next to a book that's not a Christian book. How do you manage that? Because you're asking them to teach you. I think of books as like, I'm going to find the teacher I want to learn from, and I'm going to listen to them.
I mean, for me, I think it's twofold, right? I think there is this idea that not only are you being influenced, right, and you're being taught, but people are watching you, and so you're influencing and you're teaching as well. So there's always that. I know what I want to aspire to be, and then I also hold myself to that standard as best I can. Because here's the thing, again, going back to the teachers giving you knowledge versus a personal relationship mentor, right? Even if it's a mentor, right, they can tell you the right things, but when their lives don't match up to it, then all of that influence is gone, And I struggle with that to a large degree sometimes with, pastors who are, just good, and you really like their teaching, and they're biblically sound, and, they've got these years of great teaching, and then they kind of go off the rails somewhere, theologically or whatever. And so I do struggle with the idea of like, okay, do you throw them out completely? I can't ever listen to their sermons anymore, or, same thing with worship music, right? You love a song, it moves you, and then these people go off the rails, and it's like, okay, we can never play that song again, But there is that pushback emotionally, right? There's no congruity, between who you say you are and, what you're doing, and therefore that influence is erupted. And so one of the things too is I try to hold myself to a standard as well, because I don't want something that I do to turn somebody away from the gospel. That like, see, you say one thing, you do another, then this whole stuff is hogwash. And I also believe this, we do need to live differently to a large degree, because if we look too much like the world, then they don't see the difference, right? And I remember hearing a quote one time that just stuck to me, and it was basically, being a Christian, being a Christ follower means that daily it is getting more and more difficult to tell you and Jesus apart. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. That's a neat kind of way to think about it.
Yeah, and so again, I don't think we need to be legalistic. I don't think we need to beat people over the head, and live in the don'ts, but we also, when we're hanging around friends that aren't saved and they're partiers, I don't think it's wrong to hang out with them, but not necessarily partake with them. Because in one sense too, you're telling them, hey, this is all right and acceptable behavior for a Christ follower. So I do think we need to be cautious of that. So
yeah,
I do think integrity.
That's such a big issue. So you've just opened the door to a huge
well, there's a lot there.
Realm.
Yeah. But when I'm looking at mentors and teachers, I do look for an integrity in them, that their words and their lives match up, and knowing that people are flawed and they're going to let you down at times.
Well, I think the point there, and because Stephen, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, is that like our friend Kevin used to say, like Christians are not necessarily hypocrites as much as they're always going to be inconsistent. We're going to be inconsistent. We're not going to always uphold everything that we believe. In fact, the Bible tells you you're going to be inconsistent, as we'll get into in a minute. But hypocrisy is the claim that, no, we've got this all made, and we're right, and we're good, and then we're not living. We're doing the very thing we said nobody should be doing, because with a high hand, not a, hey, I'm telling you what God said we shouldn't be doing, and I've done this, and I'm fighting through my sin. Like, that is a radical different thing. I think we got to be careful as Christians of owning God's law as what we believe is right. It's like
it's an objective ruler that you measure yourself by
measure everything by, right? Yeah. So anyway, this is a thought in my head, a lot of thought from this weekend on that. Stephen, what was your thought about like sidling up to teachers? And
there's a couple of things there.
Influence.
I don't think of Christian teachers as the same as I think of academics. So,
or like authors.
Again, so like there's a difference between someone proclaiming what God is saying from his careful observance of the truth and trying to live it out as a pastor, as opposed to someone who just studies Old Testament stuff, who's not necessarily trying to make that necessarily claim. Now, if you call yourself a Christian, you should live according to those standards, but I don't think they're the same occupation all the time for me. So for me, like, I can listen to somebody who didn't necessarily live right, I can still say that's wrong, and I can still watch their research and go, but that's good research. And if there's enough distance between their current ministry and the record of what they wrote, I might even mention them, but I still can learn from it. So, but I think that's different from a scholar than from someone who's on the pulpit and you're in the church, and a part of leading in that direction is uniquely one that you have to present your life as an example to others to follow much more readily than someone who's just writing research papers somewhere. So that's different to me. But then it's also different if you're just teaching English or something like that, because there's different worldview philosophies that I might hold from a person who writes a movie or writes a novel, and there are things in the novel I find have value, even though I might not share some of the major underlying worldview positions in the book. So if you watch like Star Trek is secular humanism, there's some humanism there as a Christian who believes that we are humans that I can relate to, and I can see the structure of the story. I can see how you illustrate an example even though I don't agree with it, and find it interesting and find it enlightening, and then find out why do I think that's wrong, or why do I think that's right, or what parts of it are right, what parts of it are wrong. Also, it's entertaining, it's well written. So I'm looking at different things, so I don't need an author of a story always to match up with every one of my worldviews, or my understanding of how things are is going to be very limited. So same thing goes with some people. Like we fall into traps as human beings that oftentimes, because we fall in love with something, we think it's true, Christian or not. So if when you're young, you're like, oh, I really like this form of literature. You don't really know how sophisticated it is until later you get older and go, I didn't see that. Now I see something totally different. Why did I love this? And you're kind of examining and going, oh, I was immature. But parts of it were good and parts of it weren't.
Yeah. So I wanna ask this last portion of this thought, because I'm thinking when you're talking, I'm thinking like Loki, right? The show that was on Disney Plus. I guess season 2 is coming out or whatever. Uh-huh. And I liked that show, but the funny thing about it was, like, it's based on a viewpoint that I know is patented, which is imaginatively fun.
Yeah.
But absolutely impossible to be in our world. But actually, I think more people now believe in the multiverse because of Loki.
I know.
And because of Marvel, and have no reason to believe in it, except that, well, it captured their imagination.
Right.
It would be like somebody today doing a great show called The Earth is Flat. And legitimately, like, this conspiracy of giant thing, people keeping, like, they put them in these boxes, and this guy starts to discover, oh my gosh,
It's like a great story with really good characters.
giant,
you
great
relate
stories
to them really well.
and you find out there's this evil organization keeping everybody thinking the world is round because they need to keep people enslaved in certain places. It's like, no, but the world is flat. And it's like that, and you would guarantee there would be an increase in belief of the world is flat if it was a good presented artistic show. So my point is, like, when you sidle up to even a TV show or something, there are things in it that is trying to teach you if you're not engaging critically, right?
Right.
So wait a minute. Now, most of the TV shows that I have watched proclaim that the earth is round. How do I know I'm not being deceived?
Have you been anywhere outside? Yes,
You travel a lot. We know you know the world's round.
exactly.
You would have fallen off by now.
And there's lots of ancient ways you can figure it out, but we don't have to go into that. We'll let somebody else ask that.
I just want to make sure I'm not
just say-
being influenced improperly.
I just say that because, like,
good
it happens in Christian circles. You fall in love with that teacher that taught you the most. You grow in that, and I think that's a good thing. But as you get older, you realize, some of that stuff I was taught was a little off.
That's why you follow Jesus.
And that's why I'm saying, like, you can have a fondness for a teacher, and they can still be wrong, and you have an affection for them, and so you readily want to defend them. You don't have to do that if you're loyal to the truth, and you can still like the person and like what they taught you and know how you've grown from that. And if they hadn't taught you that, you wouldn't have learned anything. So just know that we're all or none kinds of beings. If we love something, we want to justify it. If we, and so that's kind of how I find our world is. They actually go, I like this, and then they look for information to make it true. And Christians can do this too. It's just a human problem that when we are attracted to something, the truth can get muddled in the relationship. So you need a standard that kind of holds everybody accountable above what your feelings are, that has objectivity and still has relational value. And I don't find any worldview that strong other than Christianity that does. There's a difference between our religious narrative and other religious narratives. You got this harsh truth about human behavior from the law and stuff, and it shows you kind of how humans really treat each other. But then you got this loving God that comes down and says, I know all that, but this is how you solve it.
And is nothing like humanity in the sense of, like, unlike
still
all
loves
the other
us.
gods who are just moral degenerate gods.
Yeah, or-
he is the perfect moral God, and you're just like, oh, and he loves us. Like,
This is
crazy.
This is why Lewis and these guys read Greek mythology and other mythology. He was like, you can't read that. That's not biblical. You're right. But when you look at that God compared to the one we serve, man, you're just like, that's what they thought a God was like. And you're like, that is so different and alien from just people's impression of what a God's like now, because they didn't have that when people were actually worshiping those deities. So you look at Greek or Roman culture and how they viewed humanity. The reason why we have the views we do are mostly because of the Christian worldview that has been kind of permeated through Western society. So it's kind of interesting to me. But yeah, when you're in a classroom though and you have a teacher, it's always good to still be loyal to the truth. Going, I can like this teacher and still think they're wrong, or I can dislike this teacher and still learn something from them if I really challenge myself. So that's the hard task of every student, is to find some value there. What you can learn is a really bad worldview, which means you really got to double down on coming close to the church. This is where I do feel the church has come wrong. When I was in college, this is when the early stuff, like my entire college world was about the LGBTQ community, and I was getting research and I was getting science journals, and I was bringing this to a church and going, what do I do with this? And I'm like, look, that's dumb. We're not worried about that. We're worried about something else. And I was like, I kind of need answers. And so I had to do the double diligency of looking into the scientific answers as well as the Christian worldview, and really look at this and say, what do I do with this? I used to think this was just like, a bunch of non-Christians, or they're just trying to justify blah, 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 blah. But this is actual data. I need to process this like a Christian, which means if there's objective truth here, I need to look at it that way, and it has to go with my faith, and I have to do something with this. I can't just be like, I don't believe that. And so it behooves us especially when we send kids to college, especially if we're going to send them somewhere, to make sure they have the proper understanding how to analyze truth.
And it's you got to believe me, you're going to have to teach them more than you ever thought. Like
even in a Christian school.
I've been prepping my kids for years, and it's been hard for my son to face this very, just going to say, perverted viewpoint on literature. But I think
part of that too is, you were saying you have to teach more than you ever thought. And part of that is if they're hearing something once a month, and you feel like that's a lot of discussion, on a subject, they're hearing it from every other avenue, 13 times a day.
And you're just leading right into my next sermon.
And it's reinforcing.
Oh, good.
It's reinforcing the negative. So, yeah.
This is why it's fun to do art. Instead of just criticizing art, this is why churches should do art or engage to have people have alternate
points away for next week. We'll talk. We got a big conversation on this next week.
Well, you don't have to listen to us next week because we already covered Greg's sermon.
No. We are just starting.
So again, going into the verses even further that you were covering, it was talking about being in the vine, producing fruit, right? And
that was Justin's, but this is looking
Jesus calls us to live like Him and producing fruit.
Yeah,
look
it says
for
that.
the kind of fruit you make.
Right.
So that's yours.
You're seeing the connection between Justin's and this sermon. The fruit connection is real. Like abide in Christ, you bear fruit, right? Those connections are good. And then the middle part is he's talking about, hey, if you can't take the speck out of your brother's eye because you got a log in your own, like have some have some introspection, have some self investigation, and that what you're going to look for then is inside. You're going to see whether there's fruit or not. And
I do get good fruit, bad fruit analogies, but you're looking at good fruit, right? And not all the time good fruit is good in the sense that you can take some good fruit like cherries and other fruits and put them in a fruit cake, right? And that's pretty disgusting. Nobody wants fruit cake. It's probably one of the most regifted gifts. I don't even think we've ever received a fruit cake over the last 5 years, but it used to be everywhere.
Send your
it's coming.
Too.
Yeah, no.
Send all your fruitcakes orders to B. Branchard at obcc.church.
So again, when it comes to evaluating our fruit, we're flawed people, right? So how do we really evaluate authentically or rightly when
kind of that question of if everything's bent in the world, how can you believe anything is straight?
If I'm looking through a warped lens, how do I view myself so I'm not viewing myself warpedly? If that makes any sense at all.
Warpedly. Steve, you kind of were kind of the one kind of talking about this before, the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I do think you have people who peel onions apart and that are high self-monitors, and you have others that don't really ever give a lot of thought.
Anybody like that at all.
When you peel onions, you cry.
Yeah, because there's nothing left after you're done. Yes. But also then there are those people who are not very self-reflective at all, right? They just walk headlong into a conversation or something and don't realize what's going on in the room or anything. And so identifying what kind of self-examiner you are is healthy, but also knowing that we're not supposed to, I know it's like a misnomer. When you say self-examine, it means that you're responsible for the way yourself is viewing things. But really what you're saying is a healthy way of being able to see what's going on in the world and truth-wise. And there's a couple of things besides yourself, because you just start with asking yourself questions oftentimes. But you have the Word of God, which is an objective understanding. So if you clearly understand that, then that's a measure of how human behavior should act and be. You have the model of Christ. You also should ask, when they do a survey, when they're trying to figure out someone has an issue with them, if they're having some kind of developmental issue or something, typically you go to a pediatrician, you go to a psychotherapist, you go to a mother, you talk to a teacher, you talk to the student, and so you have this community of people that care about you, that give you a knowledge about how you act, and you're transparent with. And so in that, you are closer to fixing the crack in your mirror in the way that you see yourself properly. But that means you have to understand how human beings were created, how they're created in the image of God, what the sin nature is like. These are all important things that I think once you have as a baseline helps you self-examine where you're at and with honesty. And I really don't think we're born to do that alone. I don't see anywhere in Scripture where that happens all that often. Typically, God is revealing it. Someone else is showing it to you. Sometimes we're just super blind to certain areas that we don't want to see. And in psychology,
confirmation bias.
Yeah, confirmation bias. Sometimes it's called projection, and or just the idea that you often too in projection you're often trying to call out something that you think all human beings are like because that's the way you are. Right? And so it's the ability to look at someone and go, oh, that's that, and you're like, oh no, that's me. And some people don't get that that's me.
It's what every parent does to their child when they're like, he drives me crazy. He's pushing my buttons. Yeah, that's because he's doing the things you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so true.
And so having that clarity, that awareness, I mean, I do think you need an objective standard. This is a problem with the world, I think. If everyone's own opinion is valuable and valid, then there's actually, that leads to more arguing.
That's the blind leading the blind.
Yeah, because that means someone's got to be wrong, and there's just a whole bunch of people who think they're right. And the only way to fix that problem is through a fight. And so you need a standard that says, no, we all are human, and what that means is this. And if we have different views on that, then there's not much you can do.
I should have made this clearer in the text because I do see Jesus' logic here is very strong. He says, first, the blind leading the blind, you're going to fall into a pit. So have somebody who knows, who's seeing, a teacher. Jesus can see. Jesus is our teacher. So now you have the appropriate teacher, the right standard. And now you can become introspective. I think the problem in like a lot of progressive church stuff is they want to become introspective before they understand the standard by which to check themselves.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about my worldview stuff, I start with you need to know a basic biblical standard. You know the Bible, you need to know
the ruler.
The ruler. I call it the standard. Mm-hmm. And then you measure yourself by the standard. There's a little bit of work done in forming your framework before you examine yourself with that framework, because now it is going to be a spiral as you keep rotating from the framework to yourself. I like how C.S. Lewis put it, and I'll bring this up at the last sermon, but there's in the book of the Prince Caspian, nobody sees Aslan. The Pevensey kids have returned. Lucy is they're at this ridge, and Lucy sees Aslan, and she goes, "It's Aslan. You're bigger than you've grown. You're bigger than you were last time." He's like, "No, child. I get larger as you grow." Mm-hmm. And the idea is that God, the worldview, our understanding of who God is, expands as we develop and grow and become more mature ourselves. As we become more like Christ, you're going to find out this just doesn't stop. That's why I'm like, checklist, throw it out. Like you been there, done that. No, you haven't. Yeah. Like we just have scratched the surface of the infinite God, who is incredible and amazing and powerful. And that who's who we measure ourselves by, because you're made in his image. I mean, that is so different from a self-help book or some good world. TED Talk or something. Yeah.
What is your measure is a good question to ask a person. What do you measure humanity by? Because I don't measure anything by anyone. I measure it by myself. Okay, so you're the standard.
Yeah, you are
so then you judge other people by how you live your life.
You're a legitimate feedback loop.
Yeah, and so to me, this is a problem for all humans. How do you know what to do to call truth, and what do you measure your behavior by in order to know whether you're acting in a way that you're supposed to?
So I do think that even if there is a non-Christian sitting there, and I think the Holy Spirit starts to work on them, there will be a moment of deep honesty and clarity. If there's someone who's doing true self-reflection, where they're asking themselves, like, why am I so angry at maybe the church for standing for what they've always stood for? Like, now you could find reasons like, oh, this story or that story or this thing, or maybe you just picked it up and you don't know why you're mad. Why do you feel like you have to defend them? Why are you offended for someone else? Why is it that you feel like, the world is I love to ask people, like, why do you think, like, I don't love to ask people. I want to know people answer, like, why do you really think, like, America's in jeopardy? Like, I've heard this now for 20 some odd years of being, like, oh, the constitutional crisis. It's like, oh, is that because that's what you're being told? Do you know what the constitutional crisis is? Do you know what's in jeopardy? Like, now back up and say, why is it that you want to feel that way? Like, where did it start? What's making the fear? And I find Christians especially will fall into fear-based, like, conspiracy theories and things like this, because we're not stopping long enough to ask ourselves, like, the why annoying questions. Like, back up 21 times or something and really dig down to the root. Like, what is going on in your critique, in your frustration, your anger, and your this or your that? And that's where I think if you're going to do some self-reflection, obviously you really need to understand your Bible. You need to have that. You need to have at least Jesus down. I think knowing the essentials is critical, and having the gospel welded into your heart. And then you start to really self-evaluate. And on top of that, you've got the Holy Spirit, who I don't think is going to lie to you. I often find that the reason you know something's crooked is because he's so dang straight. Like, suddenly in your heart, there's a conviction about a sin, there's a conviction about a way of being or an attitude, and you're just like, everything in you wants to fight and give every justification or reason that you had the right to do. But what if you just experimented for a second and just accepted that conviction and then asked the Spirit of God to show you more? What would happen? Like, just assume that maybe your wife's anger at you or your friend's frustrations with you, or, this observation a small group member has given to you is actually true. And you go like, and the Spirit of God's in there going, yep. Because it's pure truth and straight. Man, you'd be like, watch what happens. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, like one of the things that's going on, I was listening to one of the podcasts. It was talking about a book called Critical Dilemma, talking about how we are where we are in the current culture. And oftentimes they're saying that we've turned our individual measure of ourself as the standard which no one can judge me by. You don't know my lived experience, right? And I don't think that's necessarily true, because that means no one can relate to you as a human. If you have a unique experience that no one can relate to, you're a species of one at that point. But also it says that sometimes we put too much emphasis on our own personal experience, and it clouds it as a universal. In other words, I was on a jury duty and the person had a bad experience with the cop. And so a cop testified, a totally different cop, about a totally different section. She's like, I can't listen to any cop because I had this bad experience. Now, there's some value in her bad experience, learning how people should treat each other, how cops should preach or teach authority, or how they should exercise it. All that's great. But now that you've applied that one experience to every person that you meet, and that's the standard by which you're going to judge things by, that's not a humble position. The Bible would say that you're more likely to fall into error if you're the only standard of authority. And so that's what we're at in our current world, is thinking that my experience is so strong in and of itself that it is the measure that every experience I have now from the future should be judged by, without that critical spirit going, is that true? Is that true enough? Do I hear that from other people? Is that true with statistics? Is that true of what a God would say, or the Spirit of God? So you're having more objectivity.
So that leads me to because if you are the sole, proprietor of what is good and what is right and what is wrong, and my story is the important story, I find it fascinating that when you give me the look that my mom gave me and made me feel horrible, then you're thinking that. Like, that's projection. That is actually legitimately like, well, I think that a lot of people who struggle with calling everybody racist are actually struggling with their own racism, in the sense that they didn't. So many of these books and things, they're about people like, well, I discovered this in myself, and so
it must be everyone else.
Everybody must be this way, and so you all need to do what I did to deal with my racism,
original sin.
And it's like, wow, that's like interesting, because not everybody struggles with the same sins, and it's so hard for people to believe that. It's so hard for people.
Doesn't mean
to
it doesn't
that.
exist. It just means it doesn't exist to the level that you've just like reorganized all of society and assumed all humanity falls into this category.
And projection happens everywhere. Like,
it happens with all of us.
What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, you were talking about, we all battle within ourselves. So, again, talking about we're flawed, we should examine ourselves. And knowing that, I'm a flawed person, although probably most of my flaws are so minute, they go totally undetectable.
Yeah. We need to talk later.
We just call Nancy and see how she feels.
But this is kind of twofold question.
Get her on the
Number
phone
one,
right now.
do you find it exhausting? Because I feel like...
Do I find you exhausting?
No, not me. That's one of my flaws. But do you find it exhausting? Because I feel like sometimes there's always something that I am, working on, or wrestling with in my life, in my character somehow, because I want to grow in that and get rid of things in my life. And I just feel like sometimes it's exhausting to constantly be battling myself. And then on the flip side, there are those that never struggle, or I know I got this problem, but they don't ever
not my
wrestle
problem, it's
with it, and so sometimes I feel like there are people that get this pass where it's like, yeah, they know this is a problem in their life, and whatever, it's me, And then there are those that are just, struggling, and they're maybe things are more black and white, and it just is tiring. I don't know if I really asked a question there.
I think it sounds like I discipled you. That's what that
really
sounds like.
does.
No, I mean, I was going to ask a personal question since we brought up Nancy. And both of you guys are married, is being married exhausting? You have to contend with the people that you're living with.
I mean, truthfully, and I'm not just saying this, is marriage exhausting? Not at all for her. I just really want to put that out there. That she probably is just like a bed of roses. We've been married almost 40 years. But no,
are you saying for you then it's exhausting?
No.
Oh, you're really digging into a hole now, dude.
Exhausting.
Maybe you should just stop this conversation completely in its tracks.
But no, I see your point. But I will say, yeah, they.
I think family is awfully exhausting.
The beauty of our marriage outweighs the exhaustedness, and there are seasons of exhaustion and
there's
seasons
fruit, right?
of growth and bliss, right?
I find that people who are unwilling to fight through the melding of their relationship, be that in marriage, friendship, parenting, any relationship, it will eventually exhaust itself. If you are willing to fight through that initial self-sacrificial care for the other person, then there is a depth of friendship that's available that is powerful and can be a support to people who are married and a support to people who are single. There is a depth in the marriage that will be bound, and it will be you'll have much better fiber to work through more issues as you move forward. And I think that and same thing with your children. We just need to get to this place where it's worth being exhausted for a little bit. Like I do find it exhausting to be constantly examining myself and challenging, but it's not when I get a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. It's not when my character shifts. It's not when suddenly I find that, oh my gosh, this was an issue in my past. By not examining myself, man, I'm leaving myself to be that person for the rest of my life. And I don't know about why people want to continue to be the person they are.
And you eliminate the opportunity to see growth.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like people have things they don't like about themselves. And I think when they just say, I'm just me, I think they just quit somewhere.
Yeah, you're also quitting, but you're also demanding that everyone else accept the thing that might be harming them. So it's like, when we say just take me as I am, everyone should love me the way I am. But what if you're not a good person and you hurt people? Why should people accept that?
Or hurt yourself.
And so to me, the idea that like we're all going to make mistakes, I think people all want grace, but they also want you to grow. I think keeping you where you are is to allow you to harm yourself and other people. And no one should allow you to do that. And the reason why I even brought it up is just because to me, I do find self-examination to be incredibly painful at times, and mostly it's always a struggle. It's always difficult, but it's worth it. Mm-hmm. It's totally worth it to me to go like, now I've lived this way for many years. I've obeyed God in these areas, so I have a list of things that I haven't obeyed Him in. But because I can look back at the things that have grown some fruit, then I can go, okay, this is worth it. I can see some progress in my humanity and in the way God's been able to use me, but also I just learn more about who He is. He becomes like the C.S. Lewis picture. He becomes so much bigger. He becomes so much more interesting, so much more valuable to know. There's like just nothing is more interesting. I mean, you say that at work at a church, but like you just want to know more about who God is, and that's never going to end. So you're like, oh, I kind of like that, but it's taken a while. It's just like I say with the church. It takes about 3 to 7 years at the churches that I worked at to start getting to the point where I feel like there's ministry going on, but there's a lot of not getting used to your idiosyncrasies, everyone else's. So it's hard work, but I don't often think people celebrate the hard work.
Well, you'll find also that's roughly around when people will bounce from a church.
Yeah, it's roughly when they bounce out of marriage.
Because you hit the difficult point. And
and I think, summing it up too is just, to to speak to the listeners a little bit too is, are you that person that is really hard on yourself and you're exhausted, and always working through issues, or are you that one that just walks through life kind of oblivious and just, I'm not on a mission to really be shaped and conformed to the image of God. I'm comfortable, not growing in this relationship. And so I would just, if you're in that camp, I would just challenge you to do more reflection in your life and see those areas that need some chipping away so that it gets harder to tell you apart from your Lord and Savior. And for those that are really struggling and tired and, feel like giving up, don't, because like we said, the rewards outweigh the difficulties of that growth. And part of that too is as you overcome it and as you find success in that, getting past things, it gives you the opportunity to disciple people up. Hey, what you're going through is not unfamiliar to me, and this is what worked for me. It's not like, okay, now you have to do what I did, but this is what worked for me, and help give them tools to defeat that in their own life.
I want to invite you, if you're somebody who is an introspective person and you're fighting through things, the biggest thing, the danger is that you become so introspective, you become depressed. Mm-hmm. You become somebody who is incapable of moving past the same feedback cycles and loops that are going on. You cannot do this, and I'm referencing back to what Stephen said earlier. You can't do this alone. The biggest victory comes when you are able to sidle up with a pastor, a small group that will listen and care and love you, maybe a counselor or a recovery group or any kind of group that's willing to listen, love you, and go through the mess with you. This is really what a good accountability does. A good accountability is the group of people you can be 100% open and honest with. You're going to find love, and you're going to find the love of God and a challenge forward. And that's the church, when the church is right. Because one of the things that the world thinks about God is they think God's the police officer. And this is one thing I want to make absolutely clear, because we talked about obedience being the foundation. And so you wonder, if I fail, then God's mad at me. No, God's not the police. God's your teacher. Teachers expect you to get things wrong, but they don't expect you to stay there. They expect you to grow. And so it's in the process of failing that God's meeting us. That's why what Jesus gave us is so incredible, and why we should be the most morally powerful people in the world. We know what the standard looks like. We have the grace of God empowering us to do it. We can make mistakes and find grace again. And so you don't have to fear being great moral people. And what I think has happened is we just kind of go well, God's going to get on me and I got to confess and so we turn him into the police officer and the guilt thing and the Catholic guilt or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, then you hide and you don't grow. You just go, well, this is who I am. You give up. Or you just fall into depression, God hates me, and you hit shame. And that's not what God's not out to shame you. God took your shame, and Jesus on the cross was ashamed for you. He bore your sins, and the penalty. And so, we are free to be the greatest moral people and creators in the world. Not prudes. We get to be free to engage in this world and in great moral endeavors. And that's what that fruit is. And we'll see way more detail on that on this weekend.
Awesome. All right. So let's get into some of the questions and statements and comments. So first off, it was a comment left here for Greg on YouTube, and it says,
we got a comment.
We got a comment. And it says, "Hi, Pastor Greg. I'm Jesse. I like the videos."
Jesse.
Hi, Jesse.
Hey.
Yes. I like the videos, and I am in the 6th grade at Olive Branch, and just subscribed. So welcome, Jesse. Woo! Yes. It's a new listener, and that's awesome. And I don't know if he
love it.
Heard about the rabbit trail from his parents or heard it from you because you're going classroom to classroom and asking the kids questions.
Yeah, they get live rabbit trails.
Yeah.
But it's a different grade
tough
levels.
questions.
So if you guys want to get more of the live rabbit trail podcasts, not necessarily on air, check into the school office every day and find out if Greg's stopping by one of the classes to ask questions. It's on Thursdays?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm kidding about that. They probably wouldn't let you in. But okay, so we got I guess it's a comment. So from Sylvia, And she emailed a question about demons planting thoughts in our head. And we,
Last
you know,
week.
Was it last week?
Was that last
A
week?
couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it might have been a couple weeks ago.
Wow. They're flying by.
So she was just replying to, she heard our discussion on it, and she goes, "You guys nailed it. You know, I knew it was in the book of Kings, but I couldn't recall where. You confirmed what I was taught and believed what I was taught and believed to be true. Thank you." The reason I asked the question about which Bible would be best to read was because of what I heard you say in the past about literal translations, scripture being out of place. Scholars would say that this scripture may be out of place or something, and a thought occurred to as a result that I needed to rebuke. If this scripture wasn't accurately translated and this scripture is out of place, what else may be inaccurate or incomplete, and what is missing or out of place? Your response was needed, and you nailed it. Thank you. It's a slippery slope, I know, and I have led people astray and have fallen far short of his glory, so I proceed with caution and ask a lot of questions. And like a good lawyer, I may already know the answers to the questions I ask, but I need to hear God through our leadership, and others need to hear it too, because not everything is about me. God is good, and I am grateful for the Rabbit Trail podcast. I tell everyone to listen to you all. And she just went through the membership class, and she was telling everybody, yeah, it's really good. You guys need to listen to this. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. And keep asking the questions. We really do want to answer the concerns that people have about their Bibles, about the faith. It's critical. It's so good.
No, and she says, lastly, I love the response about doubt. God wants all of who we are, body, mind, heart, and soul. So to doubt and to ask questions is evidence of your faith and trust, and opens up an opportunity for a deeper relationship. And all God's people say amen. Thank you again. One more thing. I am the wrong person to create transcripts, but there are apps out there that can do it. Maybe just notes. And like the Bible apps. So I'm not sure if she's asking for them, but she says, number one, I want the literal Bible, thank you. NET Bible, LEB Bible, ESV. This is a good resource that should be on the website. And number two, Logos apps. How is that spelled? It is spelled Logos. It looks like logos. It is pronounced Logos.
In the Greek.
And so,
some people call it logos.
Because then she says, like an English person.
And then she says, P.S. I just finished the book you all mentioned on the podcast episode. Not a fan. I loved it. The overlap with the current
Jesus Spiral series.
Spiritual growth campaign has not gone unnoticed, Sylvia. So thank you again for all that feedback. And then I got another one here from Kaylee. And she says, Dear Stephen and Brent. So obviously she knows who's the most important ones on the podcast, right? It could be that the two of us had a conversation with her in the kitchen, but she says,
I'm fine being left out here.
Yeah, you got soul mention from Jesse, so we get soul mention. We're even.
Someone's keeping tally.
I am.
He keeps tally everything. Who's got the most questions asked?
So, dear Stephen and Brent, in case I don't see you, I wanted to say thank you so much. I found the episode that I was asking about, and I have no idea how I missed it. It was the very next episode after my email was sent. I must have accidentally skipped it and started listening to the episode after that. I know we talked a little already, but after listening to the podcast, it made me realize that the conviction I was feeling, and for those that are confused, her question had to do with watching a show, like a CSI type show. That I think it was Missing Persons, where they brought in a spiritualist and they were doing eggs over dead bodies or something, and kind of using witchcraft to help solve the case.
It was a side character.
So I realized the conviction I was feeling is that I didn't want it to seem like I was endorsing the show, like Pastor Greg mentioned. I felt convicted that by watching the show with that character in it, it meant I supported her and her witchcraft beliefs. Even though I understand the chew and spit method, that's a reference from Mama Bear Apologetics, when it comes to good and bad things of this world, I didn't want to give my husband the wrong idea. He isn't a believer, and I know that I am one of the biggest Christian influences in his life. So it's very important to me as a wife and as a mother to be that example for my husband and my children. Anyways, thank you again so much for answering my question. I really appreciate it, Kaylee. And so when I saw that, and I emailed her back and kind of threw some things out there to her, but I just kind of wanted to address, the fact that, she's married, she has an unbelieving spouse, right? Her husband is not, he encourages them to go to church. He even comes, like when we're doing events and helps or something. And so he's not anti-church, he's not anti-God. And one of the things I asked her, to ask him was just, what is that roadblock, that he needs to, what is that hurdle he needs to get over so that he could believe and follow Christ? But just what are some of the encouraging, suggestions that you could give someone who is in a marriage where their spouse isn't a believer?
Stephen, you want to go? I'm just kidding.
I know I just threw that at you. So,
well, I think that when you have an unbelieving spouse, I'm not in that situation, but the times I've seen it, the first thing to do is obviously be praying for them. I think that, pray, not be afraid to pray for them, in the sense of like, be as consistent in your faith as you possibly can. Like, if you're going to pray for people, then you're praying at home with them, and you're praying at church. Like, don't fall prey to segmenting your faith up to where it's different in different environments. Like, it should be the same in all these cases.
Like, you're two different people.
Yeah. I think that goes a long way to just being consistent in the presentation of your faith. Now, that does mean, like, understand your convictions. So the Lord may give you a conviction that your spouse, who is not a Christian, won't have that conviction. And so your job, and this is the more difficult spot, is to be willing to go with your spouse into things as long as it's not a sin, or as long as it's not a violation of your conscience and conviction. And if it is a violation of your conscience and conviction, and not a sin, obviously you would just say, hey, that's a sin for me. Violation of conscience or conviction is a weakness. And the reason I call it a weakness is Paul calls it a weakness. It's actually in the book of Romans, chapters, I believe it's
the meat sacrifice
14.
idol.
Meat sacrifice to idols.
Yeah. So, and it's especially interesting to look through this concept of Romans. It's 15, 14. I always get this mixed up where it's at. The idea that if you've got this meat sacrifice to idols, he says that
14 verse 1.
Yeah, so he says, like, now receive the one who is weak in the faith and do not have disputes over differing opinions. This is within internal church conversations. There are some people who honestly cannot, this is often termed into alcohol, right? People cannot drink alcohol. They grew up with an alcoholic, an abusive person. Some people are alcoholics and they are sober now and they are not going to drink. And then, so what happens though is because it's a weakness, the church has a tendency to want to turn it into a demand on the other. And so he says, one person believes in eating everything, but the weak person eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not despise the one who does not, and the one who abstains must not judge the one who eats everything. And right there is the balance. It's not the job of the one who can't, like, drink alcohol or can't watch that particular movie to tell the other person, you can't watch that. That's sin. That's a weakness. But it's hard for us to admit a weakness. It's hard for us to accept that I'm weak in something, and so I can't, like, I'm weak in certain things, so I can't get on the internet without a filter, or I'm weak and I can't just turn on the TV and flip through channels. Like, I just don't do that because it's bad for me. Like, that sounds weird to people. But honestly, it's because it's a weakness for you. It would lead you to sin. It would lead you to sin, to go like, I can't go to that girls group because I end up gossiping, and that's just not something I can do. I need to make sure that I'm in a group with my husband or whatever, or with a group that with my accountability, you name it. There's lots of things that we don't realize are weaknesses. In the alcohol situation, there are plenty of people who do not get drunk and they drink. And it is not their job to, like push their, oh, come on, man, you can get over this. Just drink some. Like, you're not an alcoholic. Like, that would be sin to push somebody against their conscience, just as it would be sin opposite. So I take that in the context of the church, let alone if you're married to a non-believer, like you're to submit as a spouse or love as a husband as unto the Lord. If your spouse is asking you to do sin, that's just as a no. If they're asking you to do something against your conscience, you need to be able to be willing enough to speak to why it is and explain why it is, because it's those things that look sometimes weirdest to people. Like, I just can't watch this show because there is something about this that is causing me to feel like I'm uncomfortable in my conscience. Now, I would do the whole, log in your eye thing, get in, dig in, find out why that's a conviction. Discover what's causing you to feel that way. And then if it's the Lord telling you no, you just have to draw that line. And I think it's appropriate. It's appropriate to do that kind of stuff, but to not draw an arbitrary, unnecessary line with your unbelieving spouse because you're scared that might be bad or something. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say too, hopefully, if you got it, and we're not talking to Kaylee, we're talking to people.
Right.
So Kaylee, don't take any of this personal. This is just kind of generalizations. But hopefully, if you're in a marriage with an unbeliever, it doesn't mean that you can't have a happy, healthy, thriving marriage. And so in a happy, thriving, healthy marriage, you are concerned with, your spouse's comfort. If that doesn't make you comfortable, then I'm willing to forego it, because it makes you uncomfortable. And hopefully, you're receiving that kind of respect and honor in your marriage. And on the other side, respecting and honoring them as well, one of the things I love my wife and I just joke around, so I don't say this to disparage her in any way, but I'm going to just, no. But one of the things I think sometimes can happen in a marriage, and I just want you guys to know, I absolutely hate musicals. Hate them. I mean,
we know.
It is a sin issue. No. But I hate musicals. I don't enjoy going to orchestras and stuff like that. It is boring to me.
I shouldn't be writing The Rabbit Trail, the musical?
Yeah. No, you should not. Unless you guys want to do it by yourself. And I don't like orchestras and stuff like that. I find it highly boring. But I always go with my wife, and she makes plans, and I've seen every musical out there, and I go to musical or orchestras when she finds them and wants to go. But there was something I wanted her to do that I was interested in, and she kept saying no, that's boring. I'd be bored. I wouldn't enjoy it. And so part of me was kind of like, why does this relationship seem one-sided, right? Where you have no problem expecting me to go with you to these things I detest, yet you're unwilling to go to these things that you think you would be bored at. That seems unbalanced to me. And so again, not a sin issue or anything like that, but if your spouse is interested in something, then show them the grace that you would want them to show you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Way to throw her under the bus, though.
Yeah. She doesn't listen, so I can get away with it.
The other thing is just it's difficult to be an example to people you live with that aren't Christian. And you have this balance between your own trying to live in that space, but also trying to be on your best behavior, but also being yourself. And so that could be exhausting. But I do think it's a loving act that you did in the sense that even if it didn't bother you, because there's things I can watch that I know, like I can watch Loki and know that that's not a real Norse God, isn't really going to do something to me and doesn't have power over God or whatever. But there are people that might get into that and get into something weird. And I just know them well enough to know I probably wouldn't watch it with them because I'm afraid of where that would take them with their license. That's a loving act. And it's very similar to what Paul's talking about. And in Corinthians 8 where he says, like, I could eat this food. I know that food sacrificed to idols isn't anything, but this weaker person may not know that. And so that intimate knowledge of knowing that what might be there or not is a bit of a tricky thing. It's not a black and white thing, but knowing that about, like, okay, I know some people can gamble, but if I gamble with this buddy, he's going to totally take it the wrong way, and I'm not going to be able to witness to him, and I'm going to get him into a situation where he's thinking less about God instead of more. That's a good way to think. I mean, and that is kind of the way most evangelical stuff approaches. There's a book called Street Smarts that just came out with Greg Koukl that I'm kind of going through, and it's talking about your example of witnessing is with words, but it is also just in the way you live your life and the choices that you make and the ones that you choose to do. And those have a big impact. And sometimes it's just asking questions and having those conversations like, oh, why do you like that? Oh, okay, here's why it would be weird for me. And having that worldview conversation with them, because that's where you're going to find that, like, I respect hearing you, you respect hearing me. Those are where things are going to be like, okay, let me see why you believe that.
And again, I want to point out too that, you know, there's an attitude out there that, you know, for non-Christians, you know, when they look at Christians or the church, they think more about, and sometimes as a church, people present themselves way too much on everything that they're against and not what they're for.
What do you do
know?
with
And
your
so
life?
it just seems like a very unhappy, unfun place to be if you're against everything, you know. And so part, I think, in living that out before your spouse is, you know, the fun aspect of following Christ and not everything just being self-examination and exhaustion, you know, but finding joy in that relationship as well and letting them see that there is freedom in following Christ. You know, it is not the have-tos, it's want-tos.
My opinion is that if you're truly following Christ and he's really transforming you, you're going to be basically your non-believing spouse is going to be bragging about you. Because they're going to be like, now this is if they're decently aligned with your worldview. There are going to be certain cases where if they're like,
you might not like you because of your faith.
Yeah, your faith could bring a division, and they could abandon you, and that happens. Like if they suddenly are like, no, I want to have a throuple, or I want to open my door to this sexual stuff or whatever. No, we're not going there. It's like, in fact, I feel disrespected, and I feel like you're not loving me by doing these things. Like this is important, especially for Christian wives, because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're a doormat.
Right.
If your non-believing husband want to walk all over you with pornography or affairs or whatever, you have every right to say we're done. Unless you stop doing that, because that is bringing danger into your life. It's bringing abuse into your Christian women are not supposed to stay in abusive relationships. Jesus doesn't. If there's a violation of the covenant vows you were given, you have right to get out of there. Get safe, get away, stand up for yourself. You are the daughter of the king, and you obey Jesus before you obey that dude. And so I personally just need people to hear that, because there is a sense that lots of Christian women feel like, well, he's not believing. And then, look,
you got to get abused because of
sometimes because you're not willing to stand, they're not seeing the strength of your faith.
Right.
And so sometimes it's going to be a little uncomfortable for them because they're facing off against the living God who dwells inside of you. Don't shut down the Spirit of God within you because you think somehow that's going to win them over. It's not that is. Do not give yourself to abuse in these situations. That's not what God calls you to do.
And as a spouse, it is very important that you feel that they love you for you. You know, they accept you where you're at, even though, you know, there is an expectation of growth, you know, but they accept you for who you are and where you're at. And sometimes I think as Christians, we can come off as judgmental, unloving, and, you know, you've got to earn my love. And that is the opposite of what the gospel is. So, all right. You got anything to add?
No, there's just a lot. Maybe do some more research to come back to this topic at some point, but there's a lot involved in there, and don't want to leave people hanging too much. So,
and I mean, I know, and this will be the last thing I say, but you know, I just know that years ago, my dad was an atheist, or an agnostic, whatever you want to say. And I just remember having a conversation with him after breakfast on a Saturday. We went out for breakfast, and I told my dad, I said, hey, I know you don't believe, but why? What is that hurdle that's keeping you from believing in God? I would love to meet with you. I would love to talk about those things. Because here's the thing, right? If there isn't a God, right, then nothing's going to happen at the end of all this, right? But if there is a God, that is such an important question to answer that you can't take it lightly. Mm-hmm. You really have to examine, because once you come to the fact, and I think a lot of people aren't necessarily atheists as much as they don't want to give their life to Christ for some reason, but they do kind of believe that there's a God. You got to answer that question for yourself, because if there is a God, then you don't have a choice in the matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think part of that is just getting them to that point to understand why they do believe or why they don't believe. And once they do, then you have to do something about it. Not you, they do.
Yeah.
So.
And well, thank you guys for the comments, the kind comments, and all the just great questions and things that we got to go over today. Thanks, guys, for being with us. If you want more, please check out all the rest of the podcasts, and again, give us your thumbs up or the stars that you feel like we earned or whatever, and all the midst of that stuff.
Even the ones we didn't earn.
Yeah. Just and share us with a friend. We'd love to hear from you guys. Again, any questions, send them our way at rabbittrail@obcc.church. It's rabbittrail@obcc.church. And we are just glad that you joined with us. We pick up a bunch of stuff we threw on the floor, and we chase the truth wherever it runs. So thanks for see you guys next week.
Yes, and just one more thing. I don't know if you can deal with
Maybe two things
with podcasts on Yelp, but if you can, give us 5 stars if you like the show. If you don't like it, then go the opposite way. Give us 5 stars. Okay?
On Yelp, we have a restaurant now.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think that's it.
I didn't know Yelp does podcasts.
I don't know. I don't know these things. I'm technologically
This is a train wreck of an ending, so we're just going to end it.
We're going to just say boom chakalaka.
Give us best friends of the first 5 row.